The winter evening in Manhattan shimmered with cold light as waitresses moved between tables under chandeliers that looked like falling glass rain. La Belle Riviere wasn't the kind of place for people like Grace Bennett, at least, not on the side of the table she worked. She moved quietly, efficiently, her hands steady even as the ache in her back warned her that the double shift was wearing her thin. Every smile she gave was practiced, polite, a perfect illusion of serenity. It had to be. Rent was due in 4 days. Her tuition bill was already overdue by 2 months. And the stack of unopened envelopes back in her shared apartment carried the silent weight of consequences she refused to face until payday. At table 14, the laughter was louder than usual, expensive laughter, brittle and deliberate, like crystal struck by a knife. For men in tailored suits sat surrounded by untouched plates, half-empty glasses of wine, and the unmistakable arrogance of power. Grace had served their type too many times to count. Hedge fund partners, real estate barons, tech visionaries, men who saw the world as a chessboard and everyone else as expendable pawns. At the center of the table sat Richard Vail, the CEO of Vail Holdings. Billionaire. Philanthropist. Man whose photo had once appeared on the cover of Fortune beside the headline, "The Empire Builder." His reputation was the stuff of business school mythology, self-made, brilliant, untouchable. Grace had seen that photo once on a news site while waiting for the subway, and now the same man was sitting not 10 feet from her, swirling his wine like a king inspecting a chalice. "Excuse me, miss," one of his associates said as she approached with the dessert menu. "Our friend here has a question for you." His tone carried that playful cruelty that came from too much privilege and too little empathy. Grace smiled softly. "Of course. What can I help you with, sir?" Richard Vail leaned back, a lazy smirk curling his lips. "Tell me something, sweetheart. What would it take for you to pretend to be my daughter for an evening?" The men erupted in laughter. One of them nearly choked on his drink. Grace blinked, caught off guard, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry," she asked evenly. "You heard me," Richard continued, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of shocking someone beneath him. "Let's say $2,000. I have an event tomorrow night. You dress up, play nice, smile for the cameras. $2,000, cash. How about it?" Another burst of laughter, sharper this time. The men found their amusement intoxicating. Grace, however, didn't flinch. Her eyes met Richard's, calm and steady, a still pond against his storm of arrogance. "That depends, sir," she said quietly. "Do you want someone to act like your daughter or someone to remind you what a real one would never sell herself for?" The laughter stopped. For a full second, the entire table froze in silence. Even the pianist in the corner seemed to hesitate mid-note. Grace's tone hadn't been cruel, just matter of fact, but the words hit with surgical precision. Richard Vail's smirk faltered. The power in his posture slipped, replaced by a flicker of something that looked almost like surprise. One of his companions cleared his throat awkwardly. Another muttered something about her attitude. Grace simply waited, her tray balanced perfectly, her eyes unreadable. Richard leaned forward slightly. "You've got a sharp tongue for someone in your position. And you have a fragile ego for someone in yours," she replied softly. This time, the silence was heavy. Grace realized her pulse was hammering in her ears, but she didn't let it show. She knew she had just crossed an invisible line, the kind of line that usually got people fired. But for some reason, she didn't care. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the weeks of swallowing humiliation from customers who treated her like furniture. Or maybe it was because there was something about Richard Vail's smirk that reminded her too much of another man's, the one who'd smiled just like that while signing the papers that destroyed her father's business 3 years ago. Richard stared at her, studying her face as though trying to decipher a language he'd never heard spoken before. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a low, genuine sound that startled his tablemates. "You know what?" he said finally. "I like you. What's your name?" "Grace," she said. "Grace," he repeated, rolling it on his tongue as if testing its weight. "You remind me of someone I used to know." "Someone you respected?" she asked. His grin widened, but there was something forced in it now. "Careful, Grace. I could still report you for insubordination. And I could still report you for harassment," she said smoothly, lifting her chin. For the first time that evening, Richard Vale had no comeback. Grace excused herself quietly and walked away before anyone could see her trembling hands. In the kitchen, the head waiter scolded her for taking too long with table 14. She nodded silently, pretending to listen, while her thoughts replayed the conversation over and over. She knew she should be terrified. People like him could ruin lives with a single phone call. But underneath the fear, something else stirred, a strange, cold satisfaction. For once, she hadn't bowed. By closing time, the restaurant had emptied out except for the cleaning crew. Grace hung her apron on the hook, rubbing the ache from her wrists. When she stepped into the alley behind the restaurant, the night air hit her like a baptism, cold, clear, unrelenting. Snowflakes drifted lazily beneath the streetlights. She wrapped her coat tighter and started toward the subway, only to hear her name. Grace. She turned. Richard Vale stood a few feet away, his chauffeur waiting by a black sedan. He wasn't smiling now. His hands were in his pockets, his breath forming clouds in the air. "You forgot something," he said, extending an envelope. Grace hesitated. "What is it?" "Your tip." She frowned. "I didn't forget anything." "Maybe I did," he said. "Take it. You earned it." Her instinct screamed don't. But the way he said it, calm, almost respectful, made her hand move before her mind caught up. She took the envelope and opened it halfway. Inside, crisp bills. More money than she'd seen in one place in years. "That's too much," she said. "I can't accept." "Consider it an apology," Richard interrupted softly. "And an offer." Her eyes narrowed. "An offer?" "Yes," he said. "The one I joked about earlier." "I wasn't joking. I need someone to accompany me to a private charity gala tomorrow. You have the look, the poise, and, apparently, the courage to tell me when I'm being an ass. $2,000 for one night. No hidden terms. You have my word." Grace stared at him, the snow falling silently around them. "You can't be serious. I never joke twice about the same thing." "Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because you're the first person in years who didn't treat me like I was untouchable." Grace wanted to laugh, but something in his expression stopped her. For the first time that night, Richard Vale didn't look like a man at the top of the world. He looked lonely. She handed back the envelope. "I don't think so." "Think about it," he said. "Midtown Plaza Hotel. 8 p.m. sharp. If you don't show, I'll assume your pride is worth more than your rent." He turned, signaled to his driver, and disappeared into the night. Grace stood there for a long moment, the envelope still clutched in her fingers. When she finally looked inside, she realized he'd left the money anyway. $2,000. Exactly the amount she owed. The next morning, Grace sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the envelope. Her roommate, Lily, shuffled and wearing a blanket like a cape. "Please tell me that's not rent money from your mom again." "No," Grace murmured. "It's from work." "What kind of tip is that? Did you serve the Pope?" Grace hesitated. "Something like that." Lily frowned. "What happened?" Grace told her, at least, most of it. The arrogance. The insult. The strange, unsettling offer. When she finished, Lily whistled low. "Girl, if a billionaire offered me $2,000 just to stand there and smile, I'd do it yesterday." "It's not that simple," Grace said, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "It feels wrong. Like he wants something else." "What could he possibly want?" "You're not exactly his type." "No offense." "None taken." Grace smiled faintly. "That's what worries me." She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her landlord. 1 from her bursar's office. Her stomach turned. She knew she couldn't afford another month like this. The envelope sat between them like a loaded gun. Lily sipped her coffee. "You could at least hear him out. You're not selling your soul for a night, just renting it." Grace laughed despite herself. "That's a terrible metaphor. Welcome to New York." Grace looked out the window at the falling snow. It blurred the skyline, turning even the ugliest rooftops into something soft and almost beautiful. For a moment, she imagined another version of herself, the one who hadn't lost everything 3 years ago, who wasn't hiding behind a waitress uniform, who still believed in fairness. Then her phone buzzed again. Landlord, final notice. Rent due tomorrow or I change the locks. Grace closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them with new resolve. 8 p.m., she thought. Midtown Plaza Hotel. Just one night. The train rumbled beneath Manhattan, its rhythm steady but harsh. Grace sat near the window, the envelope still tucked in her coat pocket like a sin she couldn't confess. Every stop brought the same fluorescent blur of tired faces and muffled announcements, a carousel of strangers trying to survive the city. She stared at her reflection in the glass, pale, sharp-eyed, and far older than 24 should look. Somewhere beneath the fatigue, a question burned: why her? Why would a man like Richard Vail, billionaire, executive, empire builder, offer that kind of money to someone like her for something so strange? But she already knew the answer. Men like Richard Vail didn't do random acts of generosity. They calculated everything, even kindness. When the train screeched to a stop at 72nd Street, Grace rose, clutching the pole for balance. The memories she'd spent 3 years burying stirred like ghosts in her chest. There was a time she had worn tailored suits instead of an apron, when people had listened to her ideas rather than dismissed them. But that was before her father's company collapsed, before the press had branded the Bennetts as frauds, before she'd learned how fast the world turned its back on the powerless. Her father, Thomas Bennett, had been a visionary, or so she used to believe. He'd built Bennett and Company from nothing, a small logistics startup that once promised to revolutionize ethical trade. Investors lined up, including one powerful firm that promised to take them public. Vail Holdings. Richard Vail had been the angel investor who clipped their wings. When her father refused to merge, Vail's lawyers found a breach of contract. Within 6 months, the company was dismantled, assets frozen, patents reassigned. Her father died of a heart attack before the first hearing. Grace, then 21 and 1 semester away from graduating business school, dropped out. No scholarships, no inheritance, just debts and a name that had become synonymous with failure. She'd changed her address, her number, even her major. When she finally resurfaced in New York 2 years later, she took a new job under an alias at a restaurant no one from her old world would ever step into, or so she thought. And now, Richard Vail had walked straight into her life like the ghost of every unfinished chapter she'd tried to burn. She stepped off the subway and into the brittle morning air. Snow flurries kissed her face as she crossed the street toward the NYU campus, the one she'd returned to quietly as a part-time MBA student. Most people didn't know she was there. She worked nights, studied mornings, and existed in between. No friends, no distractions. That was the price of anonymity. Her first class was corporate ethics, which always felt like a private joke. The professor spoke of integrity and social responsibility while her classmates discussed case studies about companies like Vail Holdings, the same empire that had crushed her father's life's work. Grace kept her expression neutral as the conversation drifted to the ethics of high-stakes mergers. Sometimes, one of the students said, "You have to play dirty to stay in the game. That's just capitalism." Grace's hand clenched around her pen. The ink bled into the paper where she'd written, "Power rewards cruelty when no one calls it by name." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Grace Bennett. The voice was smooth, deliberate, unmistakably him. She swallowed. "Mr. Vail. You remembered my name. I tend to remember the people who insult me in public." He chuckled softly. "Then you'll also remember I owe you dinner. And $2,000. "I haven't decided yet," she said. "About dinner or the money?" "Think fast," he replied. "Because the offer expires at 8 tonight. I'd hate for your pride to keep you from an opportunity." "Opportunity for what, exactly?" "To be seen." The line went dead before she could respond. Grace sat frozen for a moment, phone pressed to her ear. To be seen. The words echoed louder than they should have. No one had seen her in years, not really. Not since her father's funeral, when the cameras flashed and the headlines screamed Bennett scandal deepens. She'd been invisible ever since by design. Still, the thought of seeing Richard Vail again made her pulse quicken, not with fear this time, but with something sharper. Resolve. By evening, the city was dressed in its finest, the streets glittering with snowlight, the air alive with traffic and anticipation. Grace stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the hem of the simple black dress she hadn't worn in years. It was modest but elegant, the last remnant of her old life. Her hair, usually tied back for work, now fell freely across her shoulders. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her, the one who looked like she belonged at any table in Manhattan. Lily leaned against the doorway, whistling low. "You clean up like a Bond girl." Grace smiled faintly. "You think this is a mistake?" "Oh, definitely," Lily said. "But it's the kind of mistake that could change your life. Just, keep your head, okay? Men like him, they eat people alive." "I know," Grace whispered. "That's why I'm not going there as prey." The Midtown Plaza Hotel gleamed like a palace. Valets in crisp uniforms darted between black cars and limousines, their movements choreographed in precision. Grace walked through the marble entrance, her heels echoing softly on the floor. The concierge barely looked up before offering a polite smile. "Good evening, Miss Bennett. Mr. Vale is expecting you." She blinked. "You know my name." The man smiled knowingly. "Mr. Vale ensures his guests are well recognized." A bellhop escorted her to a private elevator that ascended silently to the 30th floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a suite that looked more like an art gallery than a hotel room, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table set for two, and Richard Vale standing beside a bar, pouring himself a drink. He turned as she entered. His expression, for once, was unreadable. "Right on time," he said. "That's rare in this city." "I'm a waitress," she replied. "Timing's part of the job." He smiled faintly, motioning to the chair opposite his. "Drink?" "No, thank you." Still cautious, he observed. "Good. That's probably why I'm interested in you." Grace sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "You said you needed someone to play your daughter." He nodded, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Tomorrow night, there's a charity gala. My board expects me to appear with family. My real daughter, Sophia, has been unavailable. I'd rather not invite media speculation. You fit the general description: height, age, demeanor." Grace's brows knit together. "You want me to lie to the press?" "I want you to stand beside me and smile. That's all. You'll have a dress, a driver, and an NDA. It'll be over in 2 hours. You leave richer. I leave unbothered." She tilted her head. "Why me, though? There must be thousands of women who would say yes in a heartbeat." "Because you didn't." Grace said nothing. The honesty in his tone unsettled her. He studied her quietly for a moment. "You remind me of someone I used to trust. Before I learned better." She almost smiled. "And you think hiring me will help you trust again?" "Hiring you will help me sleep through a gala without another scandal," he said dryly. "The trust part, that's still negotiable." The banter fell into silence. The city glittered beneath them, every light a reminder of how far apart their worlds were. Yet, for a moment, she sensed an odd fragility beneath his polished exterior, a man who'd spent so long pretending to be invincible he'd forgotten what sincerity looked like. "Do you accept?" he asked finally. Grace hesitated. "I'll need the details in writing." "Smart. My assistant will send them." He paused. "You know, you surprised me last night." "How so?" "You didn't flinch." "I've had worse insults," she said. "And worse men." He raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm one of them?" She met his gaze evenly. "I think you want to believe you're not." The faintest smile touched his lips. "Careful, Grace. People who talk to me like that usually want something." "I do," she said. "Answers." "About what?" "Why someone as powerful as you needs to rent a family." For the first time, Richard looked away. When Grace left the suite that night, her phone buzzed again, a new message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Vale Holdings Tower. Dress code, formal. Use the north entrance. Do not be late." She exhaled slowly. The choice was made. Back in her small apartment, she sat at her desk under the flickering light, staring at the photograph she still kept hidden in a drawer. Her father, smiling beside her on the day Bennett and Company opened its first office. Behind him, a banner that read, "Integrity is the only real investment." She traced the edges of the photo, her voice a whisper. "I'm going to see the man who destroyed you." And for the first time in 3 years, Grace Bennett felt the quiet tremor of something she hadn't let herself feel since the day she buried her father, not fear, not grief. Purpose. The next evening unfolded with the precision of a meticulously arranged play. Grace stood outside Vale Holdings Tower, its mirrored glass facade towering over her like the judgment of the gods. Snow had hardened into frost, clinging to the steel edges of the building, and the air hummed with the sound of idling limousines. A security guard held the door for her as she stepped inside, her heart beating an unsteady rhythm beneath the fabric of her borrowed gown. She had chosen a dark blue dress that fell just above her ankles, understated elegance, simple enough to avoid attention but graceful enough to belong. The pearls at her neck were fake, the shoes a thrift store miracle, and yet when she caught her reflection in the marble walls of the lobby, she didn't see a waitress anymore. She saw someone who had once belonged to this world, someone who had lost everything and was now walking back into the lion's den armed only with composure. Richard's assistant, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s named Evelyn, met her at the private elevator. "You're on time," Evelyn said with a glance at her watch. "That's a good start. Mr. Vale values punctuality." Grace smiled faintly. "I've noticed." Evelyn pressed the button for the top floor. "I'll brief you on the details while we ride. You'll be introduced as Grace Vale, Richard's daughter. You're 24, just returned from a fellowship abroad. If anyone asks where, say Geneva. Philanthropy program." "Sounds rehearsed," Grace murmured. Evelyn's lips twitched. "Because it is. You're not the first person to fill this role." That made Grace's stomach tighten. "Meaning?" "Mr. Vale's daughter hasn't appeared publicly in over 2 years. The media's been speculating. He prefers to control the narrative. You're here to keep that control." Grace turned her head, studying the woman's reflection in the elevator mirror. Evelyn's eyes were calculating, but there was something else, fatigue. Perhaps even pity. "And what happens if someone figures out I'm not her?" Grace asked. "Then I lose my job," Evelyn said flatly. "And you'll wish you'd stayed a waitress." The elevator chimed. The doors slid open to reveal a private foyer lined with contemporary art and fresh orchids. Richard Vale was waiting, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. The transformation was striking, the arrogance from the restaurant was gone, replaced by something colder, more contained. A man who had put on charm the way others put on armor. "Grace," he said, his voice even. "You clean up well." "So I've been told," she replied. He gestured toward a table where 2 glasses of champagne waited. "Before we go, a toast. To temporary alliances." She didn't touch her glass. "You know, most people toast to success or happiness. Those are illusions," he said. "But alliances, those can be measured." Grace met his gaze and raised her empty glass anyway. "To illusions, then. They make better company." A flicker of amusement crossed his eyes. For a moment, they were equals, 2 actors aware of the script but determined to rewrite it. The gala was held in the ballroom of the New York Metropolitan Society, a space designed for the performance of wealth. Chandeliers glittered like constellations. The air smelled of champagne and floral arrangements. Grace followed Richard through the entrance, cameras flashing like lightning as the press turned toward them. She kept her chin slightly raised, her expression calm, composed, the daughter of power. "Mr. Vale," a reporter called. "Is this your daughter? The one you've kept out of the public eye?" Richard didn't break stride. "Family is private," he said smoothly. "Tonight is about charity, not gossip." The response drew polite laughter from nearby guests. Grace smiled faintly for the cameras, her heart thudding beneath the steady rhythm of the orchestra. For every photo, she imagined her father's name whispered somewhere in the background, Bennett. The name Vale had swallowed whole. At their table, they were joined by several board members and investors. One of them, an older man with a lion's mane of silver hair, leaned toward Grace. "So, Miss Vale, what kind of philanthropy work are you doing in Geneva?" Grace hesitated only a fraction of a second before answering. Sustainability initiatives. We're studying how corporate structures can better integrate community development models, especially in emerging markets. The man blinked, surprised. That's quite specific. Richard smiled. Told you she was sharp. Takes after her old man. Grace inclined her head politely, hiding the flicker of anger that burned in her chest. You mean the man you destroyed, she thought. The irony of his praise made her wine taste bitter. Throughout the evening, she noticed the way people watched him. Deference wrapped in fear. Every handshake was rehearsed. Every laugh, artificial. It was a performance of admiration masking silent resentment. The empire he built was held together not by loyalty, but by obligation. And yet, every now and then, she caught glimpses of something human, the way his expression softened when the orchestra played an old jazz number, or the moment he absent-mindedly adjusted his cufflinks before speaking to an elderly donor. There was a weariness there, one that made her uneasy. During dinner, Richard leaned slightly toward her. You're doing well. You make it sound like a job interview. In a way, it is. For what position? He smiled faintly. One that doesn't exist yet. She wanted to ask more, but a new arrival at the table cut her off, a woman in a crimson gown, her beauty sharp as glass. Richard, she purred, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. You didn't tell me you'd be bringing company. Grace, he said evenly, this is Julia Monroe. Board member. Julia, my daughter, Grace. Julia's eyes narrowed. Daughter? My, how she's grown. I thought Sophia was brunette. She experiments, Richard replied smoothly. It's a phase. Julia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course. How very modern of her. Grace returned the woman's stare, polite but firm. It's a pleasure, Ms. Monroe. I've heard quite a bit about you. Oh. Julia's smile tightened. From who? Grace took a slow sip of water. From investors. They say you're the kind of woman who can turn a profit out of thin air. Richard nearly choked on his drink. Julia blinked, caught off guard, then laughed, too loudly, too long. I like her, she said finally. Sharp tongue. You'd better watch out, Richard. She might take your job one day. I'd welcome the competition, he said, though his tone carried something unreadable. The night stretched on. Grace danced once, twice, 3 times with donors and partners, each conversation a careful balance between charm and restraint. By the time the event began to wind down, her feet ached and her throat was dry. She found a quiet corner near the balcony, escaping the noise. The city spread beneath her like a living map, lights pulsing, traffic streaming like blood through arteries of glass and steel. She felt someone step beside her. Richard. His presence was calm, almost protective. You handled yourself well, he said softly. Most people in that room would have cracked under half the pressure. I used to handle worse, she replied without thinking. He studied her face. Used to. She hesitated. Before I started over. He nodded slowly, as though understanding something unspoken. Starting over is harder than people think. Everyone wants to erase their past until they realize it's the only thing that made them interesting. Grace turned toward him, her voice steady. What about you? What did you erase? He looked at the skyline. A family, maybe. A few regrets I buried under success. And your daughter? His jaw tightened. Sophia made her choices. What kind of choices? The kind that cost people everything. There was an edge of pain in his tone that caught her off guard. It didn't sound like the arrogance she remembered. It sounded like guilt. Before she could press further, a man approached, tall, impeccably dressed, with a politician's smile. Richard. Good to see you. And this must be Sophia. Richard's composure returned instantly. Yes, Congressman Reeves. My daughter. Reeves extended a hand. Grace shook it, her expression composed. A pleasure, sir. Your father speaks highly of you, Reeves said. I hear you're following in his footsteps. Trying to learn from his mistakes, she said sweetly. Reeves laughed. Ah, youth. Always so brave. As he walked away, Richard gave her a look, half reprimand, half amusement. You really don't know when to hold your tongue. Maybe you're just not used to people speaking honestly. Touché, he murmured. After the event, the car ride back to the hotel was quiet. The city light slid across Richard's face, alternating shadows and gold. Grace watched him from the corner of her eye, trying to decipher the man beneath the layers of polish and power. When they reached the hotel, he didn't dismiss her immediately. Instead, he walked to the minibar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and handed her one. To survival, he said. She hesitated, then clinked her glass against his. To pretending. He chuckled. You really don't like me, do you? I don't know you well enough to decide. Then why do I feel like you've already judged me? Because men like you always expect forgiveness you haven't earned. The words landed heavy in the room. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Richard set down his glass and leaned back against the counter. You remind me of someone I once wronged, he said quietly. A man named Thomas Bennett. Grace's blood turned to ice. I've heard the name, she managed. He had potential. Too much, maybe. I offered him a deal that would have made him rich. He refused. Said he wouldn't sell his ethics for profit. I admired that, until it got in my way. He looked away, eyes distant. I didn't destroy him. The market did. I just accelerated the inevitable. Grace forced a steady breath. And that helps you sleep at night? Some nights, he said simply. She stared at him, every instinct screaming to reveal herself, to tell him who she was, what he'd taken. But she didn't. Not yet. Not when the man standing before her seemed so unaware that his past sins had a heartbeat standing in front of him. Instead, she said, maybe you should have listened to him. Maybe, Richard said. But then I wouldn't have built this. He gestured to the skyline beyond the window. Power doesn't reward idealists. Grace set her glass down. No. But it destroys them beautifully. Their eyes met, the hunter and the ghost of his prey. For the first time, he seemed to sense there was more to her than the role she played. Who are you really, Grace? He asked quietly. She smiled faintly. Whoever you need me to be. He studied her a moment longer before turning away. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we have a meeting at the foundation. I'd like my daughter there. She nodded, heading for the door. But as she stepped into the hallway, she allowed herself one quiet, trembling exhale. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. But he would. The morning sun crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vale Holdings Tower, casting lines of gold across the polished floor. Grace arrived early, dressed in a cream blouse and tailored black skirt borrowed from Lily's closet, her hair pulled into a tight bun. The marble lobby smelled faintly of coffee and ambition, that same sterile scent she remembered from her father's office before everything fell apart. Now she was walking through a world built by the man who had destroyed him. Evelyn greeted her with her usual clipped tone. Mr. Vale is running late. You'll wait in the conference room. Grace nodded and followed her down a hall lined with framed awards, Entrepreneur of the Year, Philanthropist of the Decade, Humanitarian Leadership Award. Each plaque was a monument to hypocrisy. Her reflection wavered in the glass frames, ghost-like among his trophies. The conference room was expansive and cold, with a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline. A coffee service waited by the wall. She poured herself a cup, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. What she felt was something deeper, the calm before a necessary storm. When the door opened, Richard entered, flanked by 2 men in suits. His voice was crisp, commanding. Gentlemen, give us a moment. They left. He turned to her. You're early. Habit, she said. In my world, being early means keeping your job. He studied her face. You say that like it's a world separate from mine. It is. She met his eyes. In yours, people can buy their way out of mistakes. He didn't reply. Instead, he walked to the window, his reflection glimmering against the cityscape. You think you know me, Grace, but you don't. People see what they want to see. The billionaire. The tyrant. The monster. None of them know what it takes to keep an empire alive. Maybe because empires are built on corpses, she said quietly. He turned sharply. Is that judgment? It's observation. The tension between them thickened like fog. For the first time, Grace felt the danger of the game she was playing. But she also saw something new in his eyes, exhaustion. The mask of power had cracks. He gestured toward the table. Sit. We have to prepare for a meeting with the board this afternoon. I'll introduce you as Sophia. Smile, nod, say little. They'll eat it up. Grace sat, crossing her legs. And what happens when the real Sophia returns? She won't, he said simply. Grace froze. You sound certain. I am. His voice was heavy now, low. She's made her choice. She's been gone for over a year. If she wanted to come back, she would've. Gone. Grace pressed. Or silenced. His gaze darkened. Careful. But she didn't back down. You're not worried about her safety. You're worried about your image. He exhaled slowly, turning back toward the window. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then tell me, she said. Convince me you're not the man everyone whispers about behind your back. Convince me you care about anything other than control. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then, softly, you sound like her. Grace's heart skipped. Sophia? He nodded. She used to challenge me like that. Said my success meant nothing if it cost my soul. I told her souls were overrated. She didn't find that funny. Maybe because she had one, Grace murmured. He looked at her then, really looked. Who are you, Grace? She forced a faint smile. Your daughter, remember? But the air between them had changed. He sensed the edges of something real underneath the performance. The board meeting that afternoon was a theater of egos. 12 executives seated around a glass table, each armed with laptops and smiles sharpened like blades. Grace sat beside Richard, her nameplate reading Sophia Vale. Her pulse drummed beneath the silk of her sleeve. Richard opened the meeting with his usual poise. Ladies and gentlemen, our foundation's next phase will focus on community partnerships. Sophia has returned from Geneva with some fascinating insights. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Grace inhaled slowly. Corporate philanthropy often fails because it serves image, not impact. If you want genuine results, start by investing in the people your policies hurt the most. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Then a man down the table chuckled. Well said, Miss Vale. Spoken like someone who's never read a balance sheet. Grace smiled sweetly. Actually, I've read plenty. Usually the ones buried in fine print where the lies live. A few heads turned toward Richard. He didn't move. His expression was unreadable. When the meeting ended, the room emptied quickly. Grace stayed seated. The adrenaline buzzed under her skin like static. Richard finally turned to her. You enjoyed that. Maybe, she admitted. You deserved it. You forget, he said, you're wearing my name. When you embarrass me, you embarrass yourself. Then maybe you should stop giving people reasons to be embarrassed by you. He laughed, low, bitter. You really have no fear, do you? I lost it when I lost everything. He tilted his head. Everything. My family. My home. My future. He paused, eyes narrowing. You talk like someone who's been burned by the system. I have, she said softly. By people who thought power made them gods. Something in his expression shifted, recognition, maybe. Or guilt. Later that evening, he asked her to join him for dinner in his penthouse suite. The view was breathtaking, the entire city glittering below, as though all of Manhattan bowed to Richard Vale. The table was set with silverware that probably cost more than her entire apartment. He poured 2 glasses of red wine and said, You don't belong in that restaurant, Grace. Maybe not, she said. But it's honest work. He smiled faintly. Honesty doesn't pay the bills. Neither does conscience, she said. At least not in your world. He took a sip of wine, studying her. You think I don't have a conscience? I think you buried it under contracts and PR campaigns. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he walked to the window, staring out over the skyline. You know, when I started all this, I wanted to make something that lasted. My father was a drunk who died with nothing but debts. I swore I'd never end up like him. So I built. And built. Until I didn't know what I was building for. She watched him carefully. And what did it cost? Everything, he admitted. My wife left. My daughter hated me. But the board never questioned me, the shareholders adored me. So I convinced myself that was enough. Was it? He turned to her. You tell me. Grace hesitated, the storm inside her tightening its hold. You said you wronged someone once. Thomas Bennett. He blinked, caught off guard. Why bring that up? Because you talk about regret like it's a luxury. But for some people, it's a sentence. Richard set his glass down. What do you know about Bennett? Enough to know he wasn't your enemy. He was naive, Richard said. Good man, bad businessman. Grace's voice trembled with restrained fury. He believed in ethics. You call that bad business? I call it weakness, Richard snapped. And weakness destroys more people than greed ever has. Then maybe you've never met the people your greed destroyed, she said quietly. His face hardened. Careful, Grace. You're stepping out of character. Maybe the character isn't pretending anymore. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Richard's expression flickered, confusion, suspicion, something close to fear. But Grace didn't look away. The truth hovered at the edge of her tongue, aching to break free. Instead, she said, I should go. He didn't stop her. In the elevator, Grace's hands shook. She pressed them against the cool steel wall, breathing hard. She had come so close, one more question, one more word, and he would have known. But she couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not until she had proof. When she returned to her apartment, she collapsed onto the couch, her phone buzzing in her pocket. It was a message from an unknown number again. Do you know what you're getting into? S. She stared at it, her heart racing. S. Could it be Sophia? She replied, who is this? No response. She tried again. What do you know about Richard Vale? Still silence. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Grace stood by the window, staring down at the city. Somewhere out there, the truth waited, buried beneath years of lies, power, and guilt. She whispered to the empty room, you'll see me soon, Father. And he'll finally remember your name. The morning sun crawled slowly across the skyline, turning the glass walls of Vale Holdings Tower into gold. Grace's reflection appeared faintly in the elevator doors as they slid shut, trapping her between mirrored steel and the weight of her double life. She clutched a slim leather folder to her chest, the kind that made her look like she belonged. Appearance was everything here, and she'd learned to wear composure like armor. The elevator ascended without sound. She could feel the hum of power beneath her feet, 1,000 moving parts that existed to serve the ambitions of one man. His tower, his empire, his illusion. When the doors opened, Evelyn was already waiting, tablet in hand, her expression carved in stone. Good morning, Miss Vale, she said flatly. Still calling me that? Grace asked. You'll need to get used to it if you're going to keep playing this part. Grace followed her through the glass hallway that led to the executive floor. The walls were lined with photos of Richard Vale shaking hands with presidents, actors, and CEOs. Each smile looked identical, rehearsed, detached, hungry. The closer they got to his office, the colder the air felt. Mr. Vale has a board meeting at 10, Evelyn said. He expects you there. Try not to improvise. I'll take that under advisement, Grace replied. Her voice was calm, but her pulse drummed beneath her skin. Inside his office, Richard stood by the window, speaking quietly into his headset. He was dressed impeccably, as always, charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, the kind of elegance that came from decades of money rather than taste. When he saw her, he ended the call and gave a faint nod. Grace, he said, you're early. Old habits. He gestured to a chair. Sit. We need to talk before the board arrives. She obeyed, crossing her legs with deliberate calm. About what? About you, he said. And about what you said yesterday. Grace feigned innocence. At the meeting? Yes. You embarrassed two of my senior directors. They've been with me for 15 years. They were wrong, she said simply. He arched an eyebrow. Wrong or human? Both, she said. But one of those can be corrected. He gave a small laugh. You sound like her. Grace's eyes flickered. Sophia? Yes. His tone softened, almost wistful. She used to question everything I did. Every decision. Every policy. She thought I'd forgotten what mattered. Did you? Grace asked. Richard didn't answer. He turned back to the window, hands clasped behind his back. The world doesn't reward integrity, Grace. It rewards strategy. Then maybe the world's broken, she said. He looked over his shoulder. You sound like you want to fix it. I just want to stop it from breaking people like my father. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she feared she'd revealed too much, but Richard didn't react. He poured himself coffee, as if he hadn't heard. You'll learn soon enough, he said, that morality is a luxury. The people who can afford it usually inherited it. Or stole it, she said quietly. His head turned slightly at that. You really don't like me, do you? I don't think you care enough for me to dislike you. He smiled faintly. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? He studied her for a long moment. Most people are. Grace's lips curved in the faintest smirk. Maybe you've been talking to the wrong people. The board meeting began exactly at 10. 12 executives seated around a polished oak table, their laptops open, eyes sharp and cold. Grace sat beside Richard, silent but observant. The digital screen at the far end displayed charts, forecasts, numbers rising like towers of deceit. Richard led the discussion with precision, his voice measured, commanding. Every word was designed to control the room, every pause deliberate. Grace could almost see the invisible strings, the power he wielded without needing to raise his voice. But when one of the directors, a man named Carver, sneered at the mention of employee welfare initiatives, she couldn't hold her tongue. Forgive me, she said smoothly, but if you consider people a liability, maybe you shouldn't be running a company that depends on them. The room went silent. Heads turned. Carver blinked, visibly offended. Richard didn't interrupt. He simply leaned back in his chair, watching her with something like intrigue. Carver forced a laugh. You must be new to the game, Miss Vale. Business isn't about feelings. It's about survival. Grace's tone stayed even. So was evolution, Mr. Carver. And the dinosaurs didn't make it either. A few stifled chuckles echoed around the table. Even Evelyn looked up from her notes. Richard finally spoke. Gentlemen, perhaps we could stay focused. But the damage was done. Power had shifted, if only slightly. The room that had once belonged entirely to him now held two centers of gravity, his, and hers. When the meeting adjourned, Grace gathered her notes and stood. Richard remained seated, his expression unreadable. Stay, he said softly. The others can go. Once the room was empty, he leaned forward. You shouldn't have done that. You mean, told the truth? I mean challenged them in public. They'll hate you for it. Then I'm in good company, she said. They already hate you. His eyes narrowed. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. You have fire. I underestimated that. Maybe you underestimate a lot of people, she replied. Perhaps, he admitted. But not you. Not anymore. That evening, he invited her to dinner in the penthouse again. The city glowed below them, a web of gold and steel stretching to infinity. The table was set for two, the air thick with unspoken tension. He poured wine but didn't drink. You intrigue me, Grace. You don't act like someone who wants my approval. Maybe because I don't, she said. I'm not here to impress you. Then why are you here? To understand you, she said. To see what kind of man thinks money can buy dignity. He laughed softly. Careful. That kind of honesty could be mistaken for arrogance. Then we have that in common. He tilted his glass toward her. Touché. For a while, they ate in silence. The air between them shifted from adversarial to something heavier, curiosity, maybe. Or danger. Finally, Richard spoke. You remind me of Thomas Bennett. Grace froze, the fork pausing halfway to her mouth. Who? Bennett. He was, idealistic. A dreamer. Smart, but too righteous for his own good. I tried to save him from himself. By destroying him, she asked, her voice barely steady. I gave him options, Richard said. He refused. Pride's a fatal disease. Her hands tightened around her silverware. He lost everything. He gambled and lost, Richard said coldly. He should have known the risks. He trusted you. Richard's gaze sharpened. What do you know about that? Grace met his eyes. Enough. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then he smiled again, that same hollow, practiced smile. You read too much. Business is war, Grace. And in war, there are casualties. And does that help you sleep? She asked. He looked away. Some nights. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him who she was, to make him see the consequences of his greed. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she could destroy him properly. Later that night, after he dismissed her, she stood on the balcony outside the penthouse, staring down at the world below. Her phone buzzed. Another message, stop pretending to be me. You don't know what you're walking into. S. Grace's stomach dropped. Sophia. She typed back, who are you? No reply. She typed again, if you're really Sophia, prove it. Still silence. She returned inside, heart pounding. Richard was gone, but his laptop sat open on the desk. A single email glowed on the screen, subject line, Foundation Audit, Confidential. Grace hesitated only a second before moving closer. The message was from a firm in Zurich, detailing irregularities in the company's charity accounts, missing funds, offshore transfers, untraceable donations. The same foundation that had made Richard a hero in the press. She felt her stomach twist. So that's what this is about. The gala, the fake daughter, the perfect image, all of it was cover for something darker. The screen went black. Curiosity can be dangerous, said a voice behind her. She spun around. Richard stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes calm but sharp. You shouldn't be in my office. I was looking for a pen, she lied. He smiled faintly. You really think I'd believe that? Grace didn't move. You think you can control everything, don't you? I don't need to control everything, he said. Just enough. What about your daughter? She shot back. Did you control her too? His expression darkened. Don't. Did you silence her like you did my father? He froze. What did you say? Her heart stopped. The words were out before she could stop them. But she doubled down, voice steady now, cold as steel. I said maybe Sophia tried to tell the truth, and you couldn't let her. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. Who told you that name? You did, she said. Every time you talk about your regrets. For a long, suffocating moment, they stared at each other. Then he exhaled slowly and stepped closer. Grace, he said softly. Whatever story you think you know, you don't. Sophia isn't dead. She's alive. But she's not innocent. What did she do? Grace demanded. She betrayed me, he said. She took something that wasn't hers and ran. The foundation was just a distraction. There's more at stake than you realize. Then tell me, she said. The truth. He hesitated, then looked away. Maybe one day. But not yet. Why not? Because you wouldn't believe me. He turned to leave, but she caught his sleeve. Try me. He stopped. For a moment, the mask slipped, just long enough for her to see it, fear. Not for his reputation, but for something, someone else. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Some things are better buried, Grace. For your sake, and hers. He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the cold hum of the penthouse lights. Grace looked down at the city again, her breath fogging the glass. Her hands shook, not from fear, but fury. The lies were unraveling, one by one. Sophia was alive. Her father's downfall was not an accident. And Richard Vale's empire was built on the bones of people who trusted him. She whispered into the silence, her voice trembling but certain, "You destroyed my father. But you won't destroy me." The next few days unfolded in silence, like the city itself was holding its breath. Grace had learned to hide her thoughts behind practiced stillness, but inside, she was a storm. Every moment she spent inside Vale Holdings now felt like walking through a museum of ghosts, the ghosts of her father's ideals, Sophia's disappearance, and Richard's sins. But beneath the fear, something sharper pulsed through her veins: purpose. Richard was careful after that night. He no longer let her linger near his office unsupervised. Evelyn shadowed her closely, as if Richard had instructed it. But Grace was good at pretending. Every smile, every polite nod, every "yes, Mr. Vale," was a performance, a mask that hid her gathering resolve. The unanswered messages from the mysterious S haunted her. She had tried calling back, texting again and again, but the number remained unreachable. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia was watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Grace spent her nights combing through online archives and old press releases about Vale Holdings. The deeper she dug, the more the truth started to take shape. Financial reports didn't lie, at least not completely. There were donations listed to offshore charities that didn't exist, and payments to shell companies registered under initials that matched no known board members. Every dollar was siphoned clean, wrapped in philanthropy, and buried in red tape. But then she found it, a single archived article from 2 years earlier, buried beneath dozens of corporate press releases. Whistleblower within Vale Foundation claims misuse of funds, investigation closed. The piece was short, vague, and swiftly dismissed. The article mentioned only one anonymous source, a young woman within the Vale family circle. Grace's pulse thundered in her ears. It had to be Sophia. When she arrived at work the next morning, the tension in the building was palpable. Evelyn's tone was colder, more clipped than usual. "Mr. Vale wants you in his office. Now." Grace followed without a word. The door closed behind her, muffling the hum of the tower. Richard stood by the window again, his back turned to her. His reflection shimmered faintly against the skyline. "You've been busy," he said. She froze. "I don't know what you mean." He turned slowly, holding a tablet in his hand. On the screen was a paused frame from a security camera, her, in his office, looking at his laptop. Her blood ran cold. "Curiosity is an expensive habit," he said quietly. "Especially when it leads you somewhere dangerous." Grace forced her voice steady. "You said you wanted honesty." "I was just trying to understand the man I'm working for." "You're not working for me," he said. "You're working with me. There's a difference." "Is there?" she shot back. "Because it feels like everyone who works with you ends up ruined." His expression hardened. "Watch your tone." She took a step closer. "You destroyed my father's company. You built this empire on people who believed in you. And you're doing it again, hiding behind the same foundation you claim helps others." For the first time, his composure cracked. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know you laundered millions through your charity," she said. "I know your daughter tried to stop you. And I know you made her disappear." The words hit like thunder. The room fell into silence. Richard's face drained of color. For a moment, he looked like he'd been struck. He spoke softly, dangerously. "Where did you hear that name?" "I told you," she said. "She reached out to me." He took a slow step forward. "You're lying." "I'm not." She held his gaze. "She warned me about you. About what you did to her. About what you'd do to me." He stopped inches away from her, his voice low. "Sophia is not dead, Grace. She's alive. But she's not what you think." "Then tell me what she is." He looked away, jaw tight. "She betrayed me. She stole confidential files, leaked them to the press, and cost this company hundreds of millions. Everything I built, she tried to destroy. She wasn't protecting anyone, she was trying to punish me. Grace's voice trembled. Or maybe she was trying to save people like my father. His eyes snapped to hers. Your father was weak. He didn't understand how this world works. The dam inside her broke. My father trusted you. He thought you were his friend. You offered him help, then crushed him when he wouldn't sell out. He died because of you. The confession burst out before she could stop it. Her voice echoed against the walls. Richard froze, the truth settling between them like broken glass. Your father, he whispered. Thomas Bennett? Grace's throat tightened. Yes. He stepped back, disbelief flickering across his face. You're his daughter. I was, she said coldly. Until you took everything from me. The silence that followed was unbearable. Richard looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in his life, the mask shattered. The titan of industry looked small. Human. Terrified. I didn't know, he said softly. God, I didn't know. Grace's hands shook. You didn't care to. He sank into his chair, eyes distant. Thomas was a good man. I told myself he'd recover, that it was just business. I told myself, his voice broke off. I was wrong. You were more than wrong, she said. You were a coward. He looked up sharply. Careful. No, she said. You don't get to tell me to be careful anymore. Richard stood suddenly, anger flickering to life again. You think I'm the villain in your story, Grace? Maybe I am. But you don't understand the choices I had to make. You've never had to build something from ashes and keep it alive while the world waited for you to fall. You built your empire on ashes that used to be people, she said. And now it's your turn to burn. He stared at her, breathing hard. Then, quietly, what are you going to do? Grace took a deep breath. Tell the truth. That night, she returned to her apartment and opened her laptop. Her hands trembled as she typed out every detail, the stolen funds, the fake charities, the shell companies, the lies. Everything she'd seen, every file she'd copied from the moments before he caught her. She attached the documents she'd downloaded from his system, the proof that Vail Holdings had embezzled millions in donations. She didn't know who would listen, but she knew who to send it to, the New York Chronicle, the same outlet that had once published the whistleblower story 2 years ago. Her finger hovered over the send button. Her phone buzzed, another message. Don't do it yet. He's not the only one watching you. S. Her pulse spiked. Who are you? She texted. Where are you? This time, there was an answer. Look outside. Grace rushed to the window. Across the street, a dark sedan was parked under a streetlight. A woman stood beside it, her face half hidden by the shadow of her hood. Even from a distance, Grace could feel it, familiarity, a strange kinship. She ran downstairs, heart hammering. The air outside was cold and electric. The woman didn't move until Grace was a few steps away. Who are you? Grace demanded. The woman pulled back her hood. And Grace's breath caught. Sophia Vail. She looked older, thinner, but her eyes, sharp, intelligent, defiant, were unmistakable. You shouldn't have come here, Sophia said. He's dangerous when cornered. Grace stared at her, unable to speak. You're alive. Sophia smiled faintly. Surprised? I thought he killed me. Sophia finished. No. But he tried to destroy me. Just like he destroyed your father. Grace stepped closer. Then help me expose him. Sophia's expression hardened. It's not that simple. There are people tied to him, investors, politicians. He's not the only one with blood on his hands. If he falls, they'll bury everyone who tries to bring him down. I don't care, Grace said. He deserves to lose everything. Sophia shook her head. It's not about what he deserves. It's about what you can live with. Once this starts, there's no going back. They'll come after you. You'll lose your job, your safety, maybe your name. I already lost my name, Grace said. He took it from me. This is the only way I get it back. Sophia studied her for a moment, then sighed. You remind me of me. I'll take that as a compliment. Sophia handed her a flash drive. Everything you need. Proof he bribed regulators, falsified audits, and used the foundation to move money offshore. But you didn't get it from me. Understand? Grace took the drive. What about you? Sophia looked away. I don't exist anymore. That's how I survive. Grace nodded. Then I'll exist for both of us. Sophia hesitated. Be careful. He's not the same man he was when I left. He's scared now, and a scared man with power is the most dangerous thing in the world. Then she was gone, swallowed by the night. The next morning, the city woke to chaos. Every major news outlet carried the same headline: Vail Holdings under federal investigation, whistleblower leaks reveal massive charity fraud. Grace watched the news feed in the cafe below her apartment, her coffee untouched, her heart pounding. Images of Richard Vail flashed on screen, leaving his building, surrounded by cameras, face pale but defiant. The world was finally seeing him for what he was. Grace exhaled, a mix of triumph and sorrow washing over her. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was justice, the kind her father never got to see. Her phone buzzed again. One new message: you did it. Now disappear. S. She smiled faintly. Not yet, she whispered. Because this wasn't over. Not until she faced Richard Vail one last time, not as his employee, not as his daughter for hire, but as the daughter of the man he destroyed. The storm broke before dawn. By the time Richard Vail arrived at Vail Holdings that morning, the world outside had already turned against him. Cameras flashed like lightning as he stepped from his car, the air electric with outrage. Reporters swarmed the entrance, their voices cutting through the cold air. Mr. Vail. Did you misappropriate funds from your own foundation? Is it true your daughter was the whistleblower? Are you stepping down? He didn't answer. He just kept walking, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. For the first time in his life, there were no cameras he could control, no scripts he could write, no stage he could dominate. His empire was bleeding in the daylight, and the vultures had come to feast. Inside the building, panic had spread like wildfire. Assistants whispered in corners, executives locked themselves in offices, and Evelyn's desk was buried under frantic messages from lawyers and board members. The company's stock price had dropped 12% in 2 hours. When Richard entered his office, the first thing he saw was Grace standing by the window. She looked calm, almost serene, the morning light catching the edges of her hair like a halo. It struck him then, she didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a reckoning. You did this, he said softly. She turned, her expression unreadable. No, Richard. You did. His voice was hoarse. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed lives. Only the ones built on lies. He laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of hero? You think anyone out there cares about your crusade? They'll move on to the next scandal by tomorrow. But me, he placed a hand on his chest. I'll survive this. I always do. Grace stepped closer, her voice low and steady. Not this time. Because now the world knows who you really are. And this time, you don't have anyone left to hide behind. He stared at her, searching for some crack in her armor, some sign of hesitation. But Grace was done pretending. Her fear had burned away, leaving only clarity. You don't understand, he said. The foundation, the deals, they were bigger than me. There are people who paid you to look the other way, she interrupted. Who made sure you'd never get caught. Yes, I understand perfectly. He swallowed hard. You've put yourself in danger. I can handle it. You have no idea what kind of men you're up against. Neither did my father, she said. But he still tried to do the right thing. That silenced him. The weight of her words hung between them like smoke. He finally sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. What do you want from me? Nothing, she said. You can't give me back what you took. For a moment, the only sound was the muffled chaos beyond the office walls. Richard's phone buzzed again and again, but he didn't answer. The world outside was collapsing, and he could do nothing but watch. Then, softly, he said, "Sophia came to see me once. After she disappeared. She begged me to stop. Said if I didn't, everything would fall apart. I told her I'd rather burn than bend." Grace's throat tightened. "And now?" He looked up at her, his voice breaking. "Now I know what burning feels like." By midday, the federal agents had arrived. They swept through the building with warrants and boxes, their presence a quiet symphony of justice. Grace stood near the elevator, watching as employees whispered and scattered. The empire that had crushed her family was crumbling one piece at a time, and she felt no triumph, only release. Evelyn approached her quietly. "You should go," she said. "Before they start asking questions." Grace nodded. "What about you?" Evelyn gave a weary smile. "I've been asking myself that for 10 years. Maybe it's time I found a new answer." As Grace turned to leave, Evelyn added softly, "He's not all monster, you know. He just forgot he was human." Grace hesitated. "We all forget, sometimes. But the good ones remember before it's too late." She stepped into the elevator, watching the doors close on the world that had stolen so much from her. When she reached the lobby, the reporters were still outside, their questions sharp as blades. But she didn't stop. She walked through them, silent, unflinching, the storm parting around her. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and relentless. It clung to her coat and hair, melting against her skin like forgiveness she didn't yet feel. That evening, the news consumed every screen in the city. Vail Holdings under investigation for corporate fraud and money laundering. The footage showed Richard being escorted into a black car, flanked by agents. His once pristine suit was rumpled, his eyes hollow. For the first time, he looked like what he truly was, a man facing himself. Grace watched from her apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her laptop. The flash drive Sophia had given her rested beside a cup of untouched tea. The world was finally seeing the truth, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Sophia, "He's finished. It's over. You can stop now." Grace stared at the words for a long time before typing back, "It's not over. Not until he admits what he did." Sophia's reply came almost instantly. "He won't. He doesn't know how." Grace set her phone aside and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered against the snow, bright and cold. Somewhere out there, Sophia was hiding again, and maybe that was the only way she could survive. But Grace wasn't hiding anymore. Not ever again. The next morning, she went to the courthouse. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the click of cameras. Richard arrived moments later, escorted by his lawyers, his expression blank. When he saw her waiting in the hallway, he stopped. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see it," she said. The man who thought he could destroy everyone and still walk free. He gave a hollow laugh. "You think this is justice? It's just spectacle. They'll forget. They always do." "Maybe," she said. "But I won't." His gaze softened, just slightly. "You're your father's daughter." "I know," she said. "That's what saved me." He nodded slowly, almost respectfully. "You've won. Congratulations." "This isn't about winning," she said. "It's about remembering." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the corridor, surrounded by his lawyers but utterly alone. Days passed. The investigation deepened. Accounts were frozen, properties seized, partners subpoenaed. The city's most powerful man had become its cautionary tale. But beneath the headlines, something quieter began to change. Grace started volunteering at a community center near her old neighborhood, the same one her father had once donated to before Vail Holdings bought it out and turned it into a tax shelter. The place was small, underfunded, and filled with people trying to start over. It reminded her of everything she'd lost, and everything she still had left. One evening, as she was closing up, she found a letter slipped under the door. No name, just her first name written in neat handwriting. She opened it. Grace. You were right. I built my life on ashes. I thought I was indestructible. But I've spent every night since the trial wondering if there's still a way to atone for what I've done. I don't expect forgiveness. But if you ever believe in second chances, maybe someday we'll both find peace. Richard Vale. She folded the letter slowly, unsure what she felt: pity, anger, sorrow. Maybe all of it. Maybe none. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. Snow was falling again, blanketing everything in quiet white. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. It was still there, but softer now, less cruel. She whispered into the stillness, "You were right, Dad. Integrity is the only real investment." And for the first time, she believed it. The final shot would have shown her walking down the empty street, her breath rising in the cold air, her figure fading into the snow. Not as a victim. Not as a fraud. But as herself, Grace Bennett, the woman who faced the man who broke her world and found the strength to build a new one from its ruins. Weeks passed, and the noise of Richard Vale's collapse began to fade into the background hum of a city that thrived on scandal and moved on just as quickly. Headlines shifted from outrage to analysis, from judgment to indifference. The empire had fallen, the man had been exposed, and yet, life went on. But for Grace Bennett, life would never return to what it once was. It had transformed, reshaped by pain and truth into something fragile but genuine. She had left her job at the restaurant. The people there still talked about her like a legend, the quiet waitress who'd been caught up in something unimaginable, the woman who had stood up to a billionaire and lived to tell about it. But Grace didn't want to be anyone's story. She wanted silence, purpose, peace. She moved into a small apartment near the edge of Brooklyn, close to the East River. The place was modest, a cracked balcony, a leaky faucet, but it faced the water, and at night, when the city lights shimmered across the surface, she could almost feel like she was standing at the edge of something new. In the mornings, she volunteered at the community center. The faces there were weary but kind, people who understood loss and rebuilding in their own ways. She spent her afternoons tutoring kids, teaching them the importance of honesty, not the kind printed in textbooks, but the kind that cost something. The kind her father had died believing in. Every now and then, she'd see an article about Richard Vale. The investigation had expanded beyond him. Several politicians and corporate figures were under scrutiny for their involvement in the fraudulent foundation scheme. His assets had been frozen, his reputation obliterated. He was awaiting sentencing, out on bail, living in a penthouse he no longer owned but refused to vacate. One morning, she opened her mailbox to find another letter. Same handwriting. Same weight. Grace. They'll take everything soon, the company, the properties, even the art on the walls. I should care, but I don't. The silence in this place is louder than applause ever was. I've been forced to listen to myself, and it's unbearable. You once asked me what I erased. The answer is simple: myself. Every decision I made in pursuit of power stripped away another layer until there was nothing left. Just noise and numbers and fear. But when I look back now, I see your father's face, and I understand. He was the man I wanted to be. You're the person I should have listened to. You don't owe me forgiveness. But I needed you to know I'm trying. R.V. Grace read it twice, her chest tightening. She didn't cry. She didn't feel pity. What she felt was something closer to understanding, a reluctant acknowledgement that even monsters sometimes realized they were human too late. She tucked the letter away and went to work. The center was preparing for a winter fundraiser, a small event meant to raise enough for new books and heating repairs. Grace helped set up tables, tie ribbons, and fold programs. There was laughter in the air, and it reminded her of something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. As the evening drew closer, a young volunteer approached her, a quiet boy named Elijah, no more than 16. "Miss Grace," he said shyly, "someone's here asking for you." She frowned. "Who?" He gestured toward the entrance. A tall man stood there, his once commanding posture softened by time and consequence. His hair was grayer, his suit cheaper, his eyes tired but sincere. Richard Vale. The room seemed to freeze. Grace's breath caught. Part of her wanted to walk away, to let him disappear into the world that had already forgotten him. But something in his expression stopped her, a quiet humility she'd never seen before. "Give us a minute," she told Elijah. He nodded and slipped away. Richard approached slowly, his hands clasped in front of him. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "I just needed to see it. The place. The people." Grace crossed her arms. "Why?" "Because it's real," he said softly. "Everything I built was an illusion. But this," he gestured around the modest hall. "This is what I pretended to care about. You actually made it matter." "You shouldn't be here," she said. "If the press finds out." "They won't. I'm not important enough anymore." Grace looked at him carefully. "Then what do you want?" He met her gaze. "To apologize." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Grace's instinct was to laugh, to tell him it was too late. But his eyes, haunted, hollow, stopped her. "I know it doesn't change anything," he said. "But I needed to say it to you. I took your father's life's work and turned it into something rotten. I destroyed the good in him because I was terrified of what it said about me. And when you walked into that restaurant, I thought I could control you too. But you were stronger than both of us." Grace's throat felt tight. "You can't undo it." "I know," he said. "But I can try to live with it." "Then do that," she said quietly. "Live with it. Live with the silence, the guilt, the truth. Because that's what you left everyone else with." He nodded slowly. "I will." For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise of laughter drifted faintly from the other room. Snow was falling again outside, thick and soft, blurring the city lights. "You're different," he said finally. "Calmer." "Peace doesn't mean forgiveness," she replied. "It means I'm done letting you own any part of me." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "You sound like Sophia." Grace hesitated. "Where is she?" He looked down. "Gone. Again. She won't see me. Can't say I blame her. She's alive, though." He nodded. "Thanks to you." "Not thanks to me," Grace said. "Thanks to her courage. She tried to stop you long before I did." "She inherited my fire," he said softly. "But not my blindness." Grace watched him for a long moment, then stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "You should go. You don't belong here." He hesitated. "Do you believe people can change?" She thought about it. "Not easily. Not completely. But they can choose to stop running." He nodded once, then turned and walked toward the door. Before he stepped outside, he looked back at her. "You were right about one thing, Grace. Power destroys. But maybe, sometimes, losing it saves us." And then he was gone. The fundraiser went on as planned. Grace spoke at the end, standing behind the small podium in front of a crowd of neighbors, volunteers, and families. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steady. "When I first came here," she began, "I thought redemption was something people either deserved or didn't. But I've learned it's something we give ourselves, by choosing not to repeat what broke us. My father believed in integrity, even when it cost him everything. I used to think that made him naive. Now I know it made him free." The room was silent. She looked out at their faces, people who had suffered, who had rebuilt, who understood. "This center exists because of him," she said. "And because of everyone who refuses to believe that kindness is weakness." Applause filled the room, soft but sincere. Grace stepped down from the podium, her heart light for the first time in years. Later that night, she walked home through the snow. The city was quiet, wrapped in white. She reached the bridge overlooking the river and stopped, leaning on the railing. The water shimmered with the reflections of 1,000 lights. She thought of her father, of Sophia, of Richard. Of how every life had collided and broken apart, leaving her standing here, still breathing, still fighting. She took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. "You can rest now, Dad. I kept your promise." The wind carried the words away, scattering them across the dark river. Grace closed her eyes, letting the cold air sting her cheeks. It didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded her she was alive. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed, One last message from an unknown number. Keep building. You were never alone. S. Grace smiled. The city lights flickered in her eyes like stars. And for the first time in a very long time, she walked toward tomorrow, not haunted by the past, but guided by it.